Hi class, in this video I want to talk about what WordPress is and why we use it in the digital media minor. You are going to look at some WordPress tutorials this week and you're going to set up your own WordPress site, but this video is just meant to orient you to what WordPress is and how it's used. So I'm going to talk about what a content management system is. WordPress is an example of a content management system. Then I'm going to talk about why WordPress is the content management system we use in the minor. I want to talk briefly about different versions of WordPress because it can be a little bit confusing. WordPress has been around for almost 10 years now and it has different versions. It can be a little confusing. I want to talk about the basic parts of WordPress, other key terms you might need to know, and then in the next video I'm going to show you how to set up a WordPress site. So first, let's talk about content management systems. You guys have now looked at a site that is made with HTML. So last week you put together a site that uses a template, and you can see by going through that process that when you write sites in HTML, when you want to update the site, you have to go into the HTML and you have to know where you need to make the changes, and you need to make the changes in the code. So that's fine. That works for a lot of different websites. But for websites that have a lot of content, you can imagine just what a pain in the butt having to go into the code to make changes to your site is. And additionally, last week you just made one page. Websites would have one HTML file for every page. So you just had index.html. If you had multiple pages, you might have index.html, about.html, process.html, services.html, contact.html, and you can see that it gets really annoying to have to go in and make changes to all of those pages every time you want to change the content of your site. So sites that are content heavy, social media sites, blogging platforms, websites where experts post weekly, websites where new products are consistently released, it would be very annoying and time-consuming to have someone on staff at those organizations who can log in and change the HTML every time something needs to be changed. So enter the content management system. Now, a content management system is free software you can get online. Creates the structure and design of your site so that you can focus on the content and not on the HTML and figuring out how to edit the HTML. It helps organize content. You can use it without programming knowledge, and it does involve some initial setup, but after that, anyone basically can use WordPress. My mother is in her 60s and she has a WordPress site. She loves it. It's super easy for her to use. I mean, she's pretty tech savvy, but she doesn't know HTML. So WordPress and content management systems in general are really attractive to organizations that don't want to invest the time and money into having someone create HTML every time they post to the website. So more or less you can think about WordPress, which is one kind of content management system, as sort of just like what you did last week. It's a pre-made website that you can edit. So last week you downloaded some files that made a website happen, and you just went in and edited it. WordPress is the same idea. It's a set of files that make a website happen. Now the website that it makes is really boring. It's black and white. It doesn't have a lot going on. There's really not much to it. It looks like this. So that's it. That's the site that you get when you install WordPress. It's just a pre-made site that's very boring. However, it comes with not just the code that makes the site happen, but code that allows you to edit it. So you don't need to look at the code to edit it. That website comes with this and a whole what we call backend that lets you edit it without using HTML. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about why WordPress is the content management system we're using in this minor, and I suggest for all of my students. First of all, the WordPress files and system itself, free. Very easy to use. After the initial setup, you can get going pretty quickly. Now it can become more complicated once you start adding features to your site, but to start out it's pretty simple. There's a lot of support online. If you go to codex.wordpress.org, it's like a giant textbook about WordPress and how it works with examples and learning files and even a forum where you can post problems and people can help you solve them. It's also it's the most popular CMS. It powers 17% of all websites that exist. That's That's more than 60 million websites. It also powers 19% of the top 10 million sites. So in the top 10 million sites, almost 1 in every 5 is a WordPress site. It was originally made for blogging by Matt Mullenweg. I think he made it when he was a 19-year-old college student, but now it's used for all kinds of sites. And that's an important thing to note because originally WordPress was only for blogs, but now it can be used for any kind of website. And there's some things that have been changed over time that it helps to understand that the whole WordPress system started out as a blog. So you can make a website with it that doesn't have a blog, but sometimes it's a little confusing because it'll have naming conventions like posts that are more geared toward blogging. Now I want to talk about different versions of WordPress because the biggest issue I see in these classes is that students get confused about what I mean when I say WordPress. There's actually 2 versions of WordPress. WordPress.org is the original. If you go to WordPress.org, you can download the WordPress files. Just like you downloaded that theme last week that made the website, you can go to WordPress.org and download all the files that make this website exist. You just need to put them on your server just like you put your HTML files on your server last week. However, since WordPress.org was invented almost 10 years ago, WordPress has created a second version, WordPress.com. This is a website where you don't need to know anything about HTML and programming and how websites work. So you guys know what a server is, you know what a domain is, you know what hosting is, you know how to go onto your server and put your website files on it. That's all good for WordPress.org. For people who don't know that and don't want to learn it, they can go to WordPress.com. They don't need a server, they don't need any of that stuff. They just log in and make an account. The downside is you lose control over your files. It's just not as good, and we'll talk about that in a second. We are not using WordPress.com. Do not go there ever in this class. And here's why. With WordPress.org, you need to buy your own hosting and domain. You guys are going to do that this week. The pros are that you can customize the theme however you want. Because you go to WordPress.org and you download the files that make the site happen, just like last week, you can change it however you want. You can change colors, you can add different themes which make it look different, you can add anything you want, really. You have, depending on your hosting and domain, typically unlimited amounts of space. You can add any kind of functionality you want. Anything open source that's out there, calendars, rosters, staff pages, you can go get it and stick it on your site. You can have as many users as you want accessing the same site, contributing their content, and making changes to the site. It supports multimedia really well. The cons are that it can be expensive. You have to buy a hosting and domain. So the files, WordPress.org, the files you get from WordPress.org are free, but you have to pay for the server to put them on. But there's lots of initial setup, which is a big pain, and you need a credit card that is going to pay for the hosting and domain. So you need to be aware of that this week. The problem with WordPress.com is that you pay as you go. If you want to change the colors, you pay WordPress $5. If you want to change the theme, you pay WordPress $60. If you want to add functionality like calendars, you pay. We're not doing WordPress.com for that reason. So here's how WordPress.org works, and again, this is going to be a review at this point. You buy hosting and domain elsewhere. Now, Ball State gives you hosting and a domain, right? Last week you looked at yourname.iweb.bsu.edu. That's your domain. The server that you logged into to add your files, that's your hosting. So Ball State gives you that for free. Unfortunately, theirs is set up not to support WordPress. So Ball State gives you hosting and a domain, but they don't let you put WordPress on it. So we're going to have to buy our own. Then you go to WordPress.org and you download the files. Just like you did last week, you get the files that make the website. You upload those pre-made files to your hosting, just like you did last week, except you can't use iWeb. Then you set up what's called a SQL database and connect it to those files. So now it starts to get a little bit more complicated because now it's different. You didn't need a SQL database last week. So let me talk about how that all works. So let's revisit that idea of how a website works. You're familiar with this now. You've had experience with it. The user types in a domain. Their browser connects to a host, pulls the files from the server, reads through them, executes them, and makes the website happen. Now WordPress is a little bit different. You can see I have a little screenshot here of the files that make up WordPress. WordPress also has what we call a SQL database. Anytime you need to capture data about the people using your site, in this case the people who are posting the content, pretty much you need to have a database of some kind. Your site last week didn't have a database. You didn't log into it. From your browser you didn't log into it. You logged into it with an FTP connection, but you didn't log in with HTTP. When you go to the website, it doesn't remember who you are. WordPress needs to do all those things. So there's a database now that is attached to your WordPress installation. And that's a table of information about the posts that you're making, the pictures you're uploading, the users. This is needed because of the content management system. Content management systems have to keep track of who logged in, who put the content on, when the content was posted, what the content is, and that's all done with the database. So it's getting a little more complicated now. We don't just have a set of files that make the website, but we have a database that goes with it. So let's take a look around at what that looks like. Let's look first at the WordPress files and then the SQL database. So I'm going to log in through FTP to one of my WordPress sites. So I actually have a site called odtr.org, One Dog at a Time Rescue. This is a nonprofit that I work with. And if I click on it, you'll see these are my WordPress files. So all of these files came from wordpress.org. I went to wordpress.org, I downloaded these files, put them on the site, and it made WordPress exist on my site. And just like last week, these are the files that make the website occur. Now, these files end with .php, not .html, and that's because they're a different language. They have HTML in them, but they use another language called PHP. We're not going to learn PHP. You'll probably see some in this class. We'll open some of these files and look at it, but you really don't need to know it to use WordPress because you don't need to use code to learn. You don't need to know code to learn WordPress. So these are the files that came from wordpress.org. However, you will see here there is a file called wp-config.php. Now this is, I'm going to open it in Text Wrangler. This is the file that tells my site what database to use. So remember, I have to have a database with WordPress. This is the file that tells my WordPress installation what database to use. I'm going to blur out the passwords and everything because I don't want people getting into my database or my WordPress. So you can see I give it the database name, the username, the password, the host, these two things, character set, and collate, you don't change. And this tells my server what database to go use. So let's go look at a database. Here I am logged into what's called a cPanel or control panel. Now, most hosting companies will give you a login and a link to the cPanel for your website. So pretty much this comes with your hosting. So I have a company called Lithium Hosting that I use, and this is my cPanel for all the websites that I have hosted here on their servers. And you can see that there's a section for databases, and there's one that says PHP My Admin. That controls my SQL databases. I'm going to use PHP My Admin. Now when I log in, I can look at my database. So I have multiple sites, so I have multiple databases. I'm going to look at this WordPress database here. What a database is basically a glorified Excel sheet. That's really all it is. It's just a series of tables. Each cell has information, so you can see here, these are different tables. So this is like your sheets in Excel. Here's one called Posts. So if I click on Posts, you can see it's just a glorified Excel sheet. Here's my first post, post author 1, that's me. Here's the date that I posted, September 26, 2013. Here's the content, welcome to WordPress. Here's the title of the post, Hello World. Publish means that it's published and visible to the world. And there's some other data on it. Now I'm going to go to the website that uses this SQL database. Here it is. This is one of the older WordPress themes. So you can see, hello world, that's my post. Welcome to WordPress. This is your first post. Edit or delete it, then start blogging. Well, if I look at my SQL database, you will see there's that content. Welcome to WordPress. This is your first post. I can actually go into my cell. I can click edit, and I can add to my post. Welcome to WordPress. This is so exciting. Go SQL databases. Ta-da. Okay. And I can save it. So by clicking go, I'm saying save and go back to previous page. And then when I refresh my page, you'll see there's that content. This is so exciting. Go SQL databases. So I can get into my glorified Excel sheet and I can change content. But that's also annoying, right? I don't want to learn SQL databases. So what WordPress does is gives you a way around this as well. So to set the site up, you do need to make a SQL database and you do need to get it started. But once that initial setup is done, you pretty much will never need to go look at your SQL database. WordPress will take care of all of it for you. So let's take a look at the parts of a WordPress site, and I have another video after this one that will help you set up WordPress, that will help you set up your SQL database. So for now, I just want you to kind of understand what they are. If you're a little fuzzy on it, it might make more sense when you start building one. But let's talk about the parts of WordPress site, and this is in both WordPress.com and WordPress.org, but again, for this class, never go to WordPress.com. You have what's called a dashboard. This is where you go log in to control the site, and you do this in your browser. So through your browser, you can log into this dashboard and control your site. This is how you're bypassing the server. You never have to make an FTP connection. This is how you're bypassing the SQL database. This dashboard is a nice little user interface where you can type in content and the system does the SQL database updates and the server updates for you. So this is why we use content management systems, right? Because you just go to your site, you click log in, you see this dashboard, you add text, you add pictures, you change the colors, you do whatever you want, and this system takes care of the rest. It updates the HTML for you. It updates the database for you. It makes the site changes for you. To access it, you're going to go to the nameofyoursite.com/WP-admin. So here on my example blog, if I put WP-admin, there's a login page, and I can log in and see my dashboard. And then when I log in, I'm going to see this dashboard here. There's also what we call the front end. Front end is what the user sees. So if you ever hear about front end developers, those are programmers who make what the user sees. So this is our front end. This is the website that you see when you type in the URL. Every WordPress site has the same parts: a header, a slider or carousel. These can sometimes have different names. This is where the main image area is. It typically revolves and shows different pictures. The content area where the blog posts go. This differs depending on what theme you use. We're not going to deal with themes just yet. Sidebar, this is an area off to the side where you can add additional features like calendars and lists of posts and tweets and things like that. And then the footer. The bottom, this is usually reserved for copyright information. So WordPress sites are what we call dynamic websites. The HTML sites we looked at last week, they're what we call static. So going back into my server, let's look at my site from last week, meganmcnames.com. And you'll see, I actually used to have a WordPress installation in here, so there's all this WordPress, but it's not actually being used. I'm using instead assets, docs, and index. So if I look at index, this is my whole site right here. So you see the title at the top. There's even the header. This whole section here is the header. We have a section for the navigation. We have a section for about. We have a section for process. We have a section for portfolio. So this is a static site, which means all of it is in HTML files. And every time I want to change something, I have to go into the HTML and change it. WordPress is what we call dynamic. So if I go back to one dog at a time, you can see that I have header. So the header is its own file, whereas in my static portfolio site, the header is just written in with the HTML. Here, the header is its own section. So look, there's just a little bit of code here that makes the header happen. That's it. And every page uses this code. So if I code in HTML, every page I make, I have to add the HTML code to the top of it to have the header with the logo and everything across the top. With these dynamic sites, I just have one file with the header, and if I want to change it with code, I can just edit it, and it will change on every single page of my site. So if I want to change the header, I just change it in here, and it changes on all the sites. So that's why it's called dynamic. In fact, you'll see sections for footer. Let me go into, I'm not expecting you to memorize the different folders in here, but if I go into my theme, you'll see that there's a footer section. Where are you? Footer, there it is. There's the footer for my website. So I can change the code of the footer in this one file, and it'll change across all pages. So the reason we have a lot more files in our WordPress than you had last week with your index in HTML is that every file just makes up one little part of the site. So there's a file for the header, and there's a file for the slider, and there's a file for the content area, and there's a file for the sidebar, and there's a file for the footer. And the way WordPress works is when someone goes to your site, your WordPress figures out what different files are needed to show each page and puts them together like building blocks. A few other key terms that you need to know with WordPress is widget. These are features for your users that don't come standard. These are things that you add to your site that don't come as part of this sort of introductory, when you put WordPress on your site, it's missing some things. It doesn't have Twitter on it. It doesn't have calendars, that kind of stuff. You can add those with widgets. Posts are content that is added continuously. These typically stack up chronologically. And again, this is because WordPress started out as a blogging platform. Categories are tags that you can add to a post to sort it out. So if you have a news website like the Daily News does, your posts would go in sections like news, and every time your writer wants to add a news article, they make it a post, and then they give it the category post, and WordPress understands that now it should go here in this news tab because it's dynamic. Pages, that's where you put content that doesn't change very often. Users don't expect pages to update very often. And theme, a theme is a pre-designed template that you can upload to your site. It comes with a specific layout, colors, and sometimes extra features. So I always say that the theme is like clothes. WordPress is like the person. It's the structure, it's the basic elements that you need to make the site happen. The theme is how you dress it up. So the theme will add different colors, different typefaces, different layouts for you. The one theme that comes with WordPress, when you put your WordPress files on your server, everyone's site looks the same. Themes are a way to make your site not look the same, to make your site look different, to kind of dress it up in different clothes. So that's everything I wanted to talk about with WordPress. Your tutorials for this week are going to walk you through some of these same ideas in a bit more detail, and then your homework will be to set up a WordPress site.